Well, I'd like to use this particular drawing to cover some issues you may well come across when you're working with landscape design software. I've made myself a little list here of things that we might cover, and I notice that there's a little note here saying no crossing dimensions. What you should aim for when putting dimensions into a design, and this is not my design, but let's see if we can examine it. Notice that the dimensions here are not on their own layer. It is a good idea to create a layer and, let me hit escape, and to put dimensions on that layer. We traditionally, and when you're using GCAD Plus, we try and follow an international standard for layer naming. So we'll call this one LDIM, and that international standard puts all the landscape elements on layers that begin with LDIM, and you'll notice that our symbol, the detail of the symbol, while the symbol itself might be on a different layer, within the symbol, the plant symbol itself is on layer L, plant symbol. But I digress. Let's come back to our dimensions. So we've selected them all, and we can put them on layer LDIM. The other thing to note is that line weight's been set to 0.13. That's about a half thickness line weight. So these are going to be relatively fine when they print. Well, they'll be readable, but they won't dominate the drawing. The other thing is, do try and center. You just grab hold of that middle one and move that text along so that they are centered in the actual dimension. Each dimension has its own particular style, and these have been set to style standard, which is the default in GCAD Plus. You can go into dimension styles, check the list, check that in this case standard is current, and you can then change aspects of the geometry. Here the arrow size, this is the metric version of GCAD Plus, has been set to 150, and text is set to 125. You just tweak those values to give you the result that you are after. Dimensions shouldn't cross. Can you see here that the dimensions crossing, that this is a wall enclosing a very formal courtyard, and you don't want dimensions, or try and avoid dimensions crossing other elements in the design. Now to manage that, if this is, notice this is 7910 from the internal space of the base of the courtyard. We want to get rid of this extension line crossing. It makes sense to turn polar on, because then we can select the dimension and just move this down like so. So we move one end of the dimension away, and there's no longer crossing any element in the design, and we can move this one down as well, and I'll unselect all there. So I'm now happy with the positioning and the fact the dimension is there and doesn't cross any other elements. Let me just go back to my notes. Nested blocks have been used. So notice a very, very formal design, but it's in a concept stage. So the same symbol, this tree symbol, it's going to be some sort of courtyard specific species chosen for its attractiveness, presumably. Notice that these same symbols been used 6 times, in fact, in the design, but there's been some work on the dimension, not the dimension, there's work on the symbol in this northern area of the courtyard. So let me unselect. I've put a copy of it over here to demonstrate what has happened here, and it's fine, but you need to be aware of the construction of some of the blocks. This is a compound block. Notice that its name, it's been given a somewhat unusual name of focal, and if I right click, I can edit that block. Now within the block there are other blocks. Let's pick the tree symbol, it's called MP. When you have a nested block such as this, the aim is to use very unique identifiers that are not going to clash with any future design work where you might use this design again. So if we now select, if we can, we'll zoom in, there's a symbol within this, so I'll try and select it, but note that the tree symbol is above it, so I can use a crossing window now and just cross. Now I've selected it, hold my shift key down and click back on the symbol. Now I've lifted, or we're dealing with a symbol within a symbol, and this one is understandably called Liriope. But if you inserted this block into other drawings and you had a block called Liriope, this one would update the existing one. So it's very careful. You need to be very careful when you're working with these nested blocks. There's also within the block a polyline, and it has certain color, and I think a couple of the other blocks have some transparency associated with them. And let me edit that one. And there's some transparency. That's been a color 94 wound right back to color 50. Let me close the block editor. So that's a compound block consisting of at least 2 blocks within it. That's fine, it works well, but you do need to be aware of it. If I delete this one, note how this has been managed. There's a block, a 600 square paver has been used, and in a sense this has been cut out, so this block's been put back on top of it. Let me undo. So the block's been placed in this position with a scale of 1, and if I unselect again, come over here, here it is again, a scale of 1. So the nested block is being used to, if you like, to cover over the larger zone of that's a single polyline with a fill, and that's been placed at the back to save some drafting time. Note tall cupressus glauca. Here's a block's been used at this area here, and 3 of them, and that's Cupressus sempervirens, and it would be the variety glauca. So especially chosen for having a narrow canopy and tall. And so the designer is trying to give the client wants a very formal design, and with 2 areas within the design, stepping down, and for safety reasons, an ornamental glass balustrade there, and that's been done using a line type and a different line type scale to quickly draw that. So there are a number of issues that we've covered. I think the paving, large format pavers, each one of those is a paver. You could very easily get quantities out because there's an option in the GCAR Plus drop-down menu to export the total number of pavers in any design. So I hope that just covers a few little issues that we work with. Remember, we started by creating a new layer, so we could just go to the dimension layer, and those dimensions at the bottom of the page will disappear. When we move to a layout space, in layout, we've put a new polyline rectangle with a corner radius of 10 to give that result. I'll just zoom extents, and we've put a new title block in, but the same title block can be used on different size sheets just by changing the scale. I dropped the scale of this one down from 1 to 5 so that I could fit it on this sheet, which happens to be an A3 size sheet. We've included a scale bar and a north indicator, and some of that information has been placed into we've got not to scale in there, because even though we have a floating viewport, the scale in there is a scale of 40 zoom extents. So if I wanted to add features, or we could go back here and we would take that one out and come back in here into layout. Just say we wanted to add notes, not the notes to me, but you could easily rename that layout. We could easily add a new viewport, and I normally like to control these by putting in a box about the size that I want. Then just double click inside that box and make the view, you're looking at a view inside the design, and it's quite, this new floating viewport is quite separate from the design. And then we display it on the layout, and we can get hold of it. It's a floating viewport, and we can just move it in position. So that's the way you would put some notes into the design. This would be your design philosophy, and a description of the design would go in that way. So I hope that covers a few aspects that came up as I was presented with this drawing for some critique.